Hello, and welcome to our podcast,
Sisters, Not Wives.
I'm your host, Kinsley Hatch.
And I'm Jocelyn Hatch. And what are we talking about today?
So last time we talked about the shenanigans of what those missionaries were doing in England. So now we're going to talk about, fast forward a little to when they come back to Nauvoo. And we're going to do another episode about like more details about what all of them are doing in Nauvoo. But I just wanted to give like kind of the setting of what was happening in Nauvoo once they get back. So Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, John Taylor, all those apostles, they served in England from 1839 and came back in 1841. So 1839 was like when they were getting kicked out of Missouri around that time. And then 1841, they're pretty well established in Nauvoo, the Mormons are. Brigham Young had been appointed, yes.
Do they still have all that power that the slutty mayor dude helped them get?
Yeah. So that was what was happening while they were away.
Oh,
That's when John C. Bennett, the slutty mayor man, it was like a kind of a power vacuum because everyone was dying of malaria in Nauvoo.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he slid in, was in 1840.
Oh, okay.
So all the apostles are gone and he slides in. And so they return to Nauvoo.
It's crazy to think that like all these things are kind of like going on interchangeably.
I know. Church history seems really bland until you realize like all these things were happening at the same time. So like England kind of like went in reverse to find out what they were doing. But by the time they come back, like John C. Bennett is in Nauvoo and doing all these things.
And you're like, who's this guy?
Yeah. So they come back and he's well established. And in England, their missions were super successful. They converted like thousands of people to the church. And that's when Brigham Young became the president of the Quorum of the Apostles, was when he was in England. And then when he came home, Brigham was appointed assistant chaplain in the Nauvoo Legion, which was the army that they created. He became a part of the Nauvoo City Council, which was a part of their whole little Nauvoo charter that made them so powerful. And he joined the Nauvoo Masonic Lodge, which a bunch of like Joseph and Hiram Smith and a bunch of people had already joined. So, which is the Freemasons.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this is where it gets interesting because
this is where it gets interesting.
So the missionaries were having all these shenanigans in England where they were like doing the feet washing with single women and saying how much they loved it. Yeah. And they were getting oranges and little presents all the time. So according to the like official narrative, this is coming from their accounts of what happened. So according to Brigham Young's recollection, he gets home and pretty quickly Joseph pulls him aside and tells him about the principle of polygamy and plural marriage, which he had never heard. Like,
this is when he was like, "Oh yeah,
yeah." So he's like, "Oh, I
knew about this too."
God already told me about this actually." And so, but yeah, that's where Brigham Young has the whole like, "Oh yeah, I already knew," and Joseph Smith's like, "Oh, the Lord opened up your eyes," according to Brigham Young. So he tells Brigham Young,
which honestly is kind of a nice way for him to set himself up as a prophet.
Yes.
To be like, I also received revelation.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Especially because Brigham Young, once he takes over, he establishes very much the hierarchy of the church and like the keys of the priesthood and Heber C. Kimball even talks about this, like Joseph Smith was Brigham Young's God and Brigham Young is my God. Like it's this weird, and it plays into polygamy too, as you see these men take women who are already married under the argument that they have a higher priesthood. So it's like that's how they convince the women, like, oh, you'll have more glory because I have a higher priesthood than your husband. And that's also how they justify it and be like,
it's crazy.
It is super crazy, but that does very much become a part of the church when Brigham Young takes over. So all these stories that he tells in hindsight about what happened, it does seem like he's trying to set himself up. He apparently told the 12 apostles and other select group of other men and women, but he kept it from his first presidency at the time, who was Sidney Rigdon, Hiram Smith, and William Law, which is interesting because Hiram Smith was the associate president, like the co-president of the church at the time, and was his own brother who they were super close with. But according to the story, he kept it from them, not to mention keeping it from Emma, this whole polygamy thing. But so according to the church's narrative, Joseph started a couple months prior, before the missionaries got home, to practice the principle of polygamy again, since the Fanny Alger thing happened in 1836. Since
We're in what year again?
we're in 1841.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Fanny Alger incident happened in 1836, and then nothing happened after that until 1841, when it said that he married his first official plural wife, Louisa Beeman, on April 5th, 1841, and Emma apparently didn't know about this marriage. And it's interesting how historians look at it, because among all the polygamous marriages from Joseph and the others, but really focusing on Joseph, they divide it into time and eternity sealings and time-only sealings. So those are the distinctions. Guess what they mean? Like, what do you think a time and eternity only sealing means versus a time only sealing, or an eternity only sealing?
An eternity only sealing? Well, obviously, time and eternity would be here in the afterlife, right? And then eternity only.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. It means that, like, we're married, but we're not, like, doing things, but we'll be married in the afterlife?
Yes. You got it. You win the prize. That is what I know.
Doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense, but that's how they divide it up. And it doesn't follow any theology that happens after polygamy dies out. Like, why would you need to seal yourself to someone for eternity only to multiple people? It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
It's like, especially if they already have husbands who are in the church. You know? But that becomes a big thing. So eternity only is for the hereafter and means they're not, like, having marriage relations and aren't having sex. But time and eternity only means they are.
It reminds me of when, like, girls have their best gay guy friends, and they're like, if we're not married by this time, then we'll have kids together. Like, in the afterlife.
Yeah. It really is weird. It's like this weird distinction that they said. And so, like, for instance, a lot of people are like, Joseph Smith is a creeper because he married Helen Mar Kimball, the daughter of Heber C. Kimball, when she was 14 years old. What a creep. And the church's like, no. That was an eternity only sealing. So they never had, like, sexual relationships or anything. But it's just weird. Like, why would you need to do sealings? Anyway, but it is also interesting because it makes it is, even though they do not really want to talk about the subject of sex as it applies to polygamy, it does very much distinguish, like, did they have sexual relations or did they not?
Right.
And so this Louisa Beeman, who was his first one, was supposedly a time and eternity sealing. So, yes, to sexual her relations. What was I even saying? Sexual.
So fit sexual.
It is speculated from his first... Wow! I like combining all my words. Partial marriage. From his first plural marriage to February 1842, Joseph was sealed to, like, 7 to 12 women, possibly. There's, like, fragmentary evidence, so it's hard to tell. And out of all the women on this list, only all of them except for 2 of them were already married to other men. So the 2 who were single was Louisa Beeman and this other woman named Agnes M. Coolberth, who was a widow. So it's kind of interesting because a lot of times when people first hear that Joseph Smith was marrying women who are already married to other men, it makes people be like, what the heck? You know, because all the normal justifications for polygamy of, like, oh, they need to raise children, this and that, and have people in the church. It's like, oh, but if they were already married to men in the church, what was the issue? So a lot of times people take pause at that. But the claim is the reason he was secretly sealing himself to married women was because of Emma, For reasons that we cannot possibly guess, Emma did not think polygamy was a good idea. I know. For some reason, she didn't like it.
That's so weird.
I know.
What a weird... She was just...
High maintenance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
High maintenance and just, like, uptight.
Yeah, she just needed to let things happen that needed to happen.
Right?
But
she's, like, preventing the Lord's work.
I know. Very wicked, honestly. A wicked woman.
Mm-hmm.
And so Emma did not approve of the idea of plural marriage. So, of course, the natural conclusion is Joseph had to lie and hide it from her, which he did. But because he was stuck between, like, how they frame it is, like, Joseph Smith was in a really hard spot because God was commanding that he do this. So he couldn't go against what God wanted. But at the same time, he loved Emma. He really did. And they had a great relationship. And so he didn't want to do it. He didn't even want to do polygamy like everyone else. No one wanted to do polygamy.
It's like the pictures of the children's story.
Yeah.
Where he's like,
I know. He's like, this is so hard. And everyone's like, but we have to. So that's kind of, they're like, he was put in a hard place. And so he was marrying married women so he could just do eternity only sealings and not have to, like, sleep with them. And so that way he could still fulfill the commandment while appeasing Emma. So that's...
And this is according to the church narrative?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what they say, and that's them, like, kind of justifying the behavior of marrying married women at this time.
Yeah.
But do you remember our good old friend, the angel with the flaming sword?
Yes, love that guy.
Yeah. So
he came back?
Yes, for his third visit.
Oh my
And
God.
he was ticked.
Oh.
So this is actually the time where he showed up with the sword. Allegedly, before these two other visits, he was just angry. But this time he brought the sword. And he was like, listen here, Joseph Smith, if you don't start having sex with these women and having, like, none of this eternity only crap, like, you need to start having full-on time and eternity only sealings. And if you don't, you will be destroyed. So he's like, oops, I guess I can't do that anymore. That was a loophole. So, which is interesting because the person who claimed this whole angel story, it doesn't quite fit the narrative of, like, when the angel appeared versus when he married Louisa Beeman. Like, they say the angel appeared after he had already married her for time and eternity. So it's just weird.
Weird, yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, the angel story doesn't come directly from Joseph Smith, or, it's interesting sources which we can get into later. But that's still what's adopted as the main narrative. So Joseph Smith starts
this. It's just so weird to me. It's so weird that that's, like, it's not even the direct source, but that's the one that the church chooses to go with.
Yeah, it's super interesting, the ones they handpick to believe and the ones they don't believe. And that's why, like, people who don't believe that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy are called, like, polygamy deniers and conspiracy theorists and all this.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're like, oh, well, we have all this evidence saying that he did. But once you look into the sources, it's like, it's very interesting to look at who the church decided to believe and what sources they're believing and what sources they're using to form the narrative.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll get into that. But so Joseph Smith starts, like, marrying more women and doing for time and eternity. And then he starts telling other people about it too. So he's already told Brigham Young, he tells Heber C. Kimball and a bunch of other people. And then Heber C. Kimball marries his first polygamous wife, Sarah Peak Noon, which, interestingly not enough, she was a woman he had converted in England. And he married her sometime between the late 1841 to the early 1842 period. Mm-hmm. So he marries her, and then Brigham Young's first plural marriage, he's already married, is to Lucy Ann Decker on June 14th, 1842.
This is the woman whose house he was sneaking into?
No, this is someone not from England.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's interesting. He does eventually end up marrying quite a few women from England, but this one isn't one of them. So we're going to deep dive into them later, but it's a really interesting story what happens when they come back. Because remember, at this time, the church is saying Joseph is going around Nauvoo secretly teaching polygamy to a select group of men and women. And polygamy is starting in Nauvoo. But at the same time, you have John C. Bennett, who is going around seducing women, also secretly saying he was, like, Joseph Smith gave him permission, but it's not polygamy because he's like, it's nothing to do with marriage or sealings. He's basically like, as long as we don't tell anyone, we can sleep together and it's not a sin. So, and he has his own little group of people who he's talking to and telling them to do it, and they're all doing that too.
Oh, so doing what he's doing?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
And they're all saying they were endorsed by Joseph Smith. And so Orson Pratt was a missionary and a part of the Mormon 12 apostles who also came back from England. As far as I could tell, I couldn't find any like foot washing incidents in his journal or anything like that. He has a very interesting story with the church. Him and his brother are both members of the 12. Parley P. Pratt, Parley P. Pratt becomes way more prominent in the church than Orson Pratt, but Orson still has a big part to play. But so his story comes into play a ton with polygamy and John C. Bennett and like things coming out of the woodworks at this time in Nauvoo. So he was a missionary, like he was an OG member of the church from 1830, and he was like basically serving missions his whole time. And
I do remember a little bit about him, where he was literally always gone.
He was, and he actually met his wife while he was on a mission. So he was 24 years old and she was 18 years old, and they met while he was like preaching.
Remind me her name.
Her name's Sarah Pratt.
Okay.
So they meet and they fall in love. No, you're good. And they get married and they take like a 3-day honeymoon, and then he's back to the mission. But eventually they like he like converts their whole family, and eventually they move to Kirtland. But he always struggled financially, which is really interesting because a lot of these other people, once they became leaders of the church, Joseph Smith also struggled financially as well. But Brigham Young, like once Brigham Young took power, a lot of them did very well financially. Like Parley P. Pratt did well, Heber C. Kimball did well, and Brigham Young did well. But Orson Pratt struggled with finances for all of his life. And a lot of it was because these people stopped going on missions and started like planting roots and being leaders of the church. And he, for all his life, he was sent away on missions. And honestly, it's probably because like he had a gift for it. He was an intellectual thinker, and he was a good orator, and he was a really good writer. And so he
didn't he write a lot of the hymns in the hymn book?
Oh, I don't know.
I thought he did.
I wouldn't be surprised, honestly. He's very eloquent, and I think, and like when in their early years, even when he wasn't serving a mission, he didn't really do financially well. I think like back then, like manual labor jobs, like wagon rights, and people who like built things like did really well. And I just don't think he was inclined to that, because he was an intellectual. I think that was part of his appeal to serve so many missions, that's what he did well at. And so, but anyway, it's kind of
like a salesman without making any money.
Yeah, honestly, it's kind of sad. And so him and Sarah struggled a lot financially at the beginning. Like in Kirtland, the economy collapsed and they did not do well. And then in Nauvoo, he sent on a mission to England, and Sarah, they already have a baby, and then she has another baby. But the sad thing is her baby dies, and then he leaves on a mission like 11 days later. So she's left mourning her child, her baby. It was like she didn't just give birth to it. It was like an 8-month-old baby who died.
8-month-old?
That's hilarious.
8-month-old.
Yeah, an 8-month-old baby who died. Yeah, so her 8-month baby died, and then her husband leaves to England, and then she's left by herself. And there is like some bishop storehouses where she's getting like some rations to support herself.
Why wasn't Parley P. Pratt?
Parley P. Pratt was also on a mission in England. Like all the 12 were in England.
That's right.
Yeah, so she was getting like some rations from like the bishop's storehouse, but the church,
they had the bishop's storehouse back then.
But it wasn't very much. Like the church was not, again, in Nauvoo, they were not doing well financially. And so she took up sewing, and like Joseph Smith employed her a lot to get her jobs so she could do sewing for other people, for him and his family, because he had a big family. And then when John C. Bennett comes to town, he's like a pretty affluent person. And so Joseph Smith introduces him to Sarah, and he starts hiring her for a lot of sewing jobs. So then something happens, either between her and Joseph Smith or her and John C. Bennett. Sometime in this period, it starts when Orson Pratt is on a mission, but even when he gets home, it said something is continuing. Because John C. Bennett arrives in 1840. It finds out he's like seducing women. Joseph Smith tries to keep it on the down low to try to like protect everyone and fix it. John C. Bennett says he's going to reform a couple times, but he doesn't. And so by... Huh?
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
No, you go.
Okay. But by May of 1842, Joseph Smith is like, okay, this guy is not going to change.
So he was there for a minute.
He was, and he rose super fast into power. So that's the other thing to consider. Joseph Smith and John C. Bennett were very powerful in Nauvoo at the time. Like, John C. Bennett was the mayor. He was a part of the the army. He was like, he started a university. He was very affluent. And so by this time, though, by May of 1842, Joseph Smith was like, we're done with this. And so John C. Bennett is disfellowshipped. And at first it kind of seems like they're amicable towards each other. Like, what?
Do you hear like a ringing?
No.
That's just my ears. It's just my ears.
That's not good.
No. Anyway.
You hear that voice? No. So at first it's really amicable, and John C. Bennett kind of is like, yeah, anyone who says that, like, yes, I was seducing women and I'm sorry, and anyone who said that I did it and claimed that Joseph Smith like gave me permission, though, is lying. I never said that, but I'm sorry that I did do these things. And I feel like he's trying to play the same game. Like, I'm going to act contrite. I'm going to be sorry. And then eventually he'll forgive me again and I'll get back to what I was doing. Mm-hmm. But Joseph Smith is not doing that this time. And he's like, goodbye. And so he like signs an affidavit saying all that. But then it quickly turns and he realizes he's excommunicated. And then he's like, oh, like... He steps down from being mayor and he realizes like people are done with him in Nauvoo. And then he gets mad and he's like, screw everyone. And so he's like, Joseph Smith made
It's like, you already did, my guy.
I know. That's what you were doing this whole time, actually. So yeah, then he like turns on Joseph Smith. He's like, actually, I was lying again. Joseph Smith did tell me to do all those things, and screw him. And so he leaves Nauvoo and he goes and starts publishing letters against Joseph Smith, like revealing what was happening in Nauvoo. And it is crazy, the things that he says in his letters. So he publishes 6 letters starting in July of 1842 about
this guy. Like, how would you believe anything that he says?
I know.
There's no credibility.
But at the same time, like, a lot of people don't know this yet because Joseph Smith kept a lot of this under wraps, partially probably thinking he'll reform, and then partially maybe to protect some of the reputations of the women who were involved. Like, who knows why he did that? Right. A lot of people think he did it because he was in cahoots with him. Who knows? Mm-hmm. But a lot of this was kept under wraps. So a lot of people didn't know he wasn't very credible because he was the mayor. He was like a person in the army. He was like a doctor. He did all these things and he rose very quickly to
everything.
He literally like entrenched himself in everything. And so a lot of people were really shocked once he released these letters, both in the Mormon community to find out like what he's saying happened, and also the non-Mormon community who has no idea about any of this going on. And so they're like, what is going on with the Mormons? Mm-hmm. But the letters are crazy. So he's basically saying that Joseph Smith gave him permission to practice spiritual wifery, and he releases 6 letters in the Sangamo Journal. And then he eventually compiles all his articles and releases a book called The History of the Saints, which is just like going after Joseph Smith and the church. And
Somebody was salty.
Yeah, he was salty majorly. But at first, it almost looks like John C. Bennett like lived in the same, like he boarded with the Smiths. He was really close with the Smiths. Obviously, Joseph Smith gave him all this power. Like it seemed like he was his best buddy. So it's like, is he telling the truth?
Yeah.
And so in the letters, he talks about how Joseph Smith created a harem, basically a spiritual harem, and women were divided into 3 degrees. So the first degree he labeled as the Cyprian saints, and he said these women were assigned the white veil. Each of them have different colors. So the first one is the white veil, and he said this class of I'll just read it. The class of females who indulged in their sensual inclinations without restraint, whether single or married, by the express permission of the prophet. So he basically says this is a group of females who, if any man was like, ooh, I like them, and it was reciprocated, they then went to the prophet and was like, hey, can we have sex? And then the prophet was like, yes. And so he's like, that's the first degree of women. The second degree of women he called the chambered sisters of charity. And he said these women were much more numerous and were also known as the saints of the green veil. So green was their color. And he says these women were a lot more numerous than the first degree, and they were considered more respectable because they were specifically reserved for all the high elders and the apostles and the high priests of Israel.
Okay.
Yeah, so he says that's the second degree. Like, basically, these women were, like, on call to serve these men in a sexual way. And then the third degree was the highest degree, and he said he named these the cloistered saints, or the saints of the black veil. So their color was black, and he said these were women specifically consecrated by Joseph Smith to be set apart as the secret spiritual wives of the most eminent, like, male members of the church, and were seen as God's spiritual favorites. So he releases that, and everyone's like, what on earth?
He think that's what Joseph Smith was saying.
Yeah, he's saying that's what Joseph Smith was doing, that he created this whole structure, and he was using the Relief Society to, like, recruit women into these 3 degrees. So, yeah, super cruelty.
The Relief Society is like a recruitment?
Yeah, that's what he's saying. And so people hear this for the first time, and they're like, are you kidding me? Like, are the Mormons really doing this? And then he also starts releasing, like, and Joseph Smith has been trying to seduce women, and here's a bunch of stories of women he's tried to seduce. And one of the women, he, like, on July 15th, he releases a letter to the newspaper saying how one of those women was Sarah Bates Pratt, Orson Pratt's wife.
Oh, okay.
So he says this whole narrative of how Joseph Smith was, like, lusting after her, and she was so beautiful and awesome, and he, like, couldn't not resist her. And so he went to her and tried to get her to join the 3rd degree, the, like, most special one, because he wanted her for his secret wife. And she rejected him and was like, no, I have one husband and I'm happy with him. And Joseph Smith and her, like, went back and forth with it. And then he was like, once it became clear she was not into it, he was like, okay, well, you better keep it secret. And she's like, maybe I will, maybe I won't. And then he was like, well, if you don't keep it secret, I'll ruin your reputation. So then, according to John C. Bennett, she tells her landlords about it, and she's like, I detest Joseph Smith. He tried to get me to, like, he made moves on me, blah, blah, blah. And then it kind of fizzles out. But then Orson Pratt is back, and then he tries to kiss her like Joseph Smith does. He, like, makes a move on her, and then she's like, that's it. I'm telling Orson Pratt.
Who tries to make a move? Wait, what?
John C. Bennett is claiming that Joseph Smith tried to kiss Sarah Pratt, and that was the last straw for her. And so then she told her husband, and that's how it all came out to be, and how he knew about that, how Bennett knew about that, and how he, like, Joseph Smith tried to recruit him to get her for him, and he was like, I'm not going to do it. So he releases this whole story, and Orson Pratt's like, what? Because then Joseph Smith's like, actually, no, Bennett was the one having an affair with Sarah Pratt. And so they're both accusing each other of having relations with Sarah Pratt.
Dang.
Yeah. And so Orson Pratt is like, are you kidding me? Like, I just get home from my mission and I either learn my wife is having an affair with this Bennett dude, who I do not know, or like the prophet who I have served for 12 years and like very much invested into this church tried to get with my wife behind my back.
Mm-hmm.
And so the day it's released, he has a meltdown and he writes a suicide note, leaves it with his family, and he disappears.
Sad.
Yeah, he's like, he has a mental breakdown. He's like, he can't, like both of those realities, whatever is true is horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And so he disappears, and then they find the note, and Joseph Smith like gets a search party together. They go try to find him, and they eventually do find him, and one of the people documented it. Oh, and something else that was really weird about Bennett claiming it is he said after Sarah Pratt rejected him, he killed
Joseph Smith.
Yeah. So after Joseph went to Sarah and she rejected him, he like killed a sheep and they painted blood on their doorposts. And then he did an animal sacrifice with the sheep, with like the entrails and the insides of the sheep, so the destroying angel would stay away from them.
Okay.
So really wild stuff that Bennett is saying happened. Anyway, so they get a search party and they eventually find Orson, and he, like 5 miles outside of Nauvoo, and they said his like mind had temporarily gave way. That's the verbiage they use. And they find him like sitting on a rock at the Mississippi River, like 5 miles away from Nauvoo. Yeah,
okay.
I know. Just like obviously totally devastated whatever has happened. His life is falling apart. And so they find him and take him back to Nauvoo. And then it becomes like kind of a smear campaign between John C. Bennett.
What does Sarah have to say, though?
Sarah, that's the thing. Sarah, neither Orson or Sarah, they do not say anything publicly about this. But Sarah does tell Orson, like, yeah, Joseph Smith, like, we don't quite know what she told him, but she knows she's saying what Bennett is saying is true. Like, yeah, Joseph Smith went on to me. Because otherwise, the alternative is she committed adultery with Bennett.
Yeah.
And so Orson's like, do I believe my wife or do I believe the prophet? And so Joseph Smith starts releasing all this information, and but Joseph Smith's like, sorry, but yeah, she was committing adultery. Here's what her landlord said they saw. And her landlords, their last name was like the Goddards. And they're like, yeah, we like John C. Bennett would come over to the house multiple times a day, and sometimes we would be over there like at 10 at night, and we would be leaving, and he would stay way longer. And then a couple times we would come and they would be like in bed together, and the baby would be on the floor. Like, so they were like, yeah, they were definitely doing something, definitely seemed like they were having an affair. And then this other witness,
why would he throw her under the bus with Joseph Smith? John C. Bennett. Why would he do that?
I know, right? Well, no, because he was saying, it is sad because out of the losers in this scenario, Sarah is the biggest loser. Either way, whichever story is true, like you have these two powerful men who are fighting each other to clear their name, but either way, she looks bad. But in Bennett's story, it looks like she is like spurning Joseph. So that's the one where she looks the best.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Yeah, because Bennett claims that Joseph was like, she never gave in. So
it just heard like a whole bunch of unnecessary drama.
Yeah.
You didn't need to even say anything. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But the thing is, if it was happening, like, it should be aired out, you know? But yeah, so Joseph Smith releases that, and he releases another testimony by the sheriff of Nauvoo, who is a non-Mormon, who is like, yeah, it definitely looked like they were having an affair. Like, John C. Bennett would say things to me about Sarah Pratt that was sexual in nature and like blah, blah, blah. And then John C. Bennett just starts releasing all this John C. Bennett never really addresses like those two things, but he just keeps going after Joseph Smith. And Sarah Pratt is like telling Orson that it's true, so you have them two who are saying that Joseph Smith, it was true. And so Orson is like conflicted, but it's causing a ton of drama in Nauvoo because Joseph Smith like reveals all the other seductions that John C. Bennett was doing, and so they're both like going after each other's reputation a ton. And Orson and Sarah Pratt are like literally caught in the middle, and so Orson and so everyone's like, I hate this, but it always happens in these kind of situations, is people start to write like character references. Basically, people start citing things about like, no, Joseph Smith is of high character, and like that's circulating in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Apparently there was stuff being said about the Quorum of the 12 Apostles as well, which is interesting. And so they start like passing these things around, like sign them about the character of Joseph Smith and these men. And Orson doesn't say anything publicly, but he's like, I'm not going to sign that. And then there's these other things of people attesting to like John C. Bennett's bad character. And Orson's like, I'm not going to sign that either. And so the 12 get mad at him. They're like, so you don't believe in Joseph and you don't believe in us, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, actually, no, I believe my wife. And which is crazy back then, you know? And so, but he's like, no, I believe my wife and I'm not going to sign any of this. And we're not leaving Nauvoo. I don't know what we're going to do, but I believe her. And so the Quorum of the 12 get really upset about this because things are being...
Is he an apostle?
He is.
Okay.
And so Brigham Young writes about it a lot. And another thing that Bennett does is at this time, flash from the past, a Missouri thing happens. So the governor, Lilburn Boggs, who was the governor at the time, who signed that extermination order for them to get kicked out.
Yeah.
News travels to Nauvoo like right at this time that someone tried to assassinate him. And so he was like in his house a couple blocks away from Independence, Missouri. And then someone in the middle of the night, he's like reading his newspaper, and someone in the middle of the night has a revolver, shows up to his house and shoots him in the head and the neck. And at first people think he died from it because it was pretty graphic what happened.
But he didn't?
He didn't. He lived. And so he was running for the state senate at the time in Missouri, and Missouri was crazy back then. So he had a lot of political enemies that were pretty dangerous. So at first everyone's like trying to figure out of one of them who did it. And then John C. Bennett hears about it. And so he writes another letter. He's like, Joseph Smith! Yeah, he's like, Joseph Smith definitely said that the governor's not going to live past a year and that something's going to happen to him. And then he like ordered Porter Rockwell to go and kill him. And so then...
But wasn't Porter Rockwell like, wait... Who's that guy?
Porter Rockwell was like Joseph Smith's bodyguard, and then he became Brigham Young's bodyguard.
Okay.
Yeah, and he was kind of known as a pretty gnarly guy. And so news of that comes out, and then John C. Bennett's like, I bet it was Joseph Smith. I actually heard him say it. And so then like arrest warrants get sent out for Porter Rockwell and Joseph Smith, and they're like, dang it. So they have to go into hiding. Eventually they get acquitted for it, but at this time it's like, oh great, another like horrible thing is going to happen where we get arrested and treated unfairly and possibly killed or mobbed or whatever. So both of those two people like are like, okay, we have to go in hiding, and like Joseph Smith is scared of getting kidnapped and taken, you know, like
I don't know why, but I just had this imagery in my head of Porter Rockwell like picking up Joseph Smith and carrying him away on his shoulder. Over my dead body.
No, Porter Rockwell was like, everyone for himself, and he took off.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
I feel like I've heard a lot of stories about that guy.
Yeah, he's a gnarly dude. One of my favorite roads in Utah is called the Porter Rockwell like highway or something, because no one's on that road, and it gets me really quick.
Never heard of it.
Yeah. So. It will take you to Draper to Lehigh really quickly.
Oh.
Yeah. But I digress. Yeah, so that starts happening, and then Orson Pratt is not going to sign any of this stuff, and the Quorum of the 12 really are like pushing Orson Pratt to like pick Joseph's side. So they, Brigham Young and Wilford Woodruff kind of write about it. I have to find it. It's really interesting to see like Brigham Young's account of it versus Joseph Smith's account. Brigham Young wrote in a letter to Parley P. Pratt, who was still in England at this time, I think, on July 17th, 1842. So 2 days after the letter came out. And he was much closer with Parley P. Pratt. He's like, we will not let Brother Orson go away from us. He is too good a man to have a woman destroy him. Just so interesting how Brigham like thinks his wife is destroying him from all this, you know. But then he further records how he and the 12 labored nearly constantly to change his mind, but his mind became so darkened by the influence and statements of his wife that he came out in rebellion against Joseph, refusing to believe his testimony or obey his counsel. He said he would believe his wife in preference to the prophet. Joseph told him if he did believe his wife and follow her suggestions, he would go to hell. And then Brigham loosely threatened him, saying, and you're going to lose your position in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles and probably get kicked out. And I love Orson for this. He's like, you know what? I think you should ordain another man, adorn Brother Lyman to take over my position. Telling Brigham,
He's like, I don't care.
shove it, Yeah. And so, Wilford Woodruff talks about his excommunication. He says, there was a council of the 12 held for 4 days with Elder Orson Pratt to labor with him to get him to recall his sayings against Joseph and the 12. So there was also things going on about what the 12 were doing, which I think is interesting. But he persisted in his wicked course and would not recall any of his sayings that were unjust and untrue. The 12 then rejected him as a member of their quorum, and he was cut off from the 12. Dr. John Cook Bennett was the ruin of Orson Pratt. So Joseph Smith and
sad.
Yeah, so the 12 was the ones who excommunicated him.
Mm-hmm.
But they stayed in Nauvoo, and then the whole assassination thing happens, and it seems like maybe they're kind of closer with Bennett. And then Bennett sends Orson a letter being like, okay, we're going to entrap Joseph Smith so he gets arrested for this assassination and held responsible. And this months have passed by and a lot has come out about John C. Bennett at this point. So John C. Bennett was crazy. So not only does it come out,
caused a lot of havoc.
Yeah, he did. But not only does it come out all his seduction, his attempts, but there's a lot about him. Before this, he was super involved in a lot of money schemes with schools where he would funnel money to himself by raising money for institutions that he was not a representative of, which is interesting that he wanted to create a university in Nauvoo, but he had that history. And he also would forge degrees, law degrees and doctor degrees, and hand them out to people to get paid.
Was he a Taurus? I don't know if he
know. Is that something Tauruses do? Forgery?
Yeah, they're kind of lazy, but also very ambitious, and also
it doesn't matter. We'll have to look it up. I don't know, but
it just sounds like the definition of one to me.
Dang, that's gonna be crazy if you're right. Let's look it up
for funsies. When's his birthday?
No, he's a Leo. Leo? August 3rd?
Oh, yeah. It's a Leo.
Leo.
That also sounds right.
Yeah.
But Taurus would have been.
Taurus would have been
one of his moons of Taurus. He's got Taurus in there somewhere.
Yes. So that all comes out how he was kind of a money launderer. Not a money launderer, but just money scheming and lying, and how he had a reputation even in the non-Mormon community. They were he's the greatest villain unhung. That was his little thing that people said about him.
Greatest villain unhung.
Yeah. So, and then just everyone's these outlandish claims are not backed up by anything, and so by this time his credibility does start to people will start, the sensationalism of it starts to wear off, and people are this guy's pretty shady. And he's you know what, I even went to Nauvoo to secretly get close to Joseph to trick him, and everyone's it
was he just got too exaggerated.
Yeah,
he just went too far.
Yeah, and that whole harem thing, it was interesting. Yeah, so at this point it's January, and he's we're gonna trap Joseph Smith, and he sends a letter to Orson, and Orson's no. And so he brings it to Joseph Smith, and he gets and I guess they reconcile. And Joseph Smith says he was illegitimately excommunicated and illegitimately taken away from the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. And so Joseph reinstates him in the church and in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, which is, I just think that's interesting that he said he was excommunicated illegitimately. It sounds like the 12 got ticked at him and was goodbye. And then, but nevertheless, Joseph Smith still accused Sarah Pratt of adultery with Bennett. And there's like a letter. No, it's in like a minutes meeting with him that was recorded.
So what happened to Orson Pratt?
It's sad. I know. Well, also Sarah Pratt, they both have really sad stories, honestly. So after this, it's interesting also that Brigham was like, Joseph Smith, he said he's going to go to hell if he believes his wife. This little bit was what Joseph Smith said after in January to Orson. He was still like, she lied about me. I never made the offer, which she said I did. I will not advise you to break up your family unless it were asked me. Then I would counsel you to get a bill, like a bill of divorcement, from your wife and marry a virtuous woman and a new family. But if you do not do it, I shall never throw it in your teeth. And then Brigham Young said, after he was back in, he said the only thing he personally had against Orson was when he came home, he loved his wife better than David. David referring to Joseph Smith in some weird way.
Okay.
Yeah, really weird. But just interesting how Brigham Young sees it. You know, like you can clearly see that Brigham Young is like, how dare he love his wife and believe him more than the prophet, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens with Orson Pratt and Sarah Bates Pratt is they stay in the church. They're like, Sarah was never excommunicated, only Orson was.
Interesting.
Yeah. But Orson is reinstated into the quorum of the 12 apostles. And
Orson was?
Mm-hmm.
He's reinstated?
Yeah, Joseph Smith reinstates him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's where all that came in January. Like it was only a couple months where he wasn't. Like it was in August, I think August 20th, where he was like taken out, and then
he was disfellowshipped or excommunicated.
He was cut off from, people say excommunicated. People say he was cut off, like he was removed from the quorum of the 12 and he was excommunicated.
Mm.
But it's kind of weird because Joseph Smith said the excommunication was illegitimate, so it's not like he got rebaptized or anything. So he's just like welcomed back into the church, basically. So Orson Pratt stays in the church and continues his thing, and then Joseph Smith and Sarah, we don't really know. Sarah Pratt, like years, well, I'll just tell her how it goes. So Orson Pratt, they both stay in the church. So Orson Pratt stays in the church. Sarah stays in the church. He remains a member of the Quorum of 12 Apostles. Joseph Smith dies in 1844, June 1844. And in October, Orson becomes a polygamist. And he takes on his first wife, his first plural wife. And then Orson, by the end of it, he has 10 wives.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because him and Brigham Young fight a lot after Joseph Smith died. Orson he's always sent on missions, and everyone like says that Brigham Young was really careful. He didn't want Orson to have too much influence in the church, and so he kept sending them away on missions, whereas his brother Parley P. Pratt like established himself and grew affluent, and you know, like all these other people kind of got like the sweet side of things, and Orson never did. He was always poor. He was always being sent on missions. And the sad thing is they were always trying to control him too. Like he found a manuscript of Lucy Mack Smith publishing an account of like what had happened to them in their life, and he published it in England because it was cheaper to do that than America. And Brigham Young and everyone got ticked because he didn't allow them to edit it before he published it, because they were very much about controlling the narrative. And so they're like, there's so many inaccuracies in this. And so things like that, like he would publish things and then they would be like, how dare you do that? Blah, 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 blah. And Orson was like not afraid. That's the one thing I do like about him. I think he did finally succumb to polygamy, and I think he treated Sarah Pratt pretty poorly after that. But the thing I do like about him is I think he always had a free will and he was a free thinker.
Yeah.
And I honestly feel like maybe after the whole incident with Sarah Pratt, that's how he justified polygamy in his head. You know, like, oh, well, maybe she cheated on me, you know? And I feel like
maybe like never ever got over it.
Yeah, because it clearly devastated him at the beginning. So, and it just seemed like Brigham Young and them were like trying to get their claws into him, you know?
Yeah. I feel like, do you remember like the Women of the Church History dramatized tapes we used to listen to? I feel like we had one of her.
I feel like we did too.
that's how I, like, a lot of the Orson stuff sounds familiar. But, like, they didn't get into any
of that. I think there is a tape about her that we did
Like,
listen
none.
to. Yeah.
It was just about, like, how she was a hard worker. She was a seamstress, and he was gone all the time.
Yeah.
But none of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to go check to see if that is. Because, yeah.
Yeah, I'm super
It sounds familiar. And it's just sad because he takes on his, like, plural wife. Like, I feel like the 12, like, that whole traumatic incident happened to him. And he probably lost trust in a lot of things. And then he probably just, you know, I feel like polygamy, like, a lot of men were like, oh, I won't do that. And then suddenly they're doing it, you know? I think it's just, like, an easy, especially for that time when they are religious men.
Why wouldn't you?
Right.
Honestly.
If you're justified in God and you have, like, sexual, you know, like, men are very sexual, and, you know, it just seemed like really easy to fall into for them.
Right.
And especially all the justifications of how they're going to have so much glory in the afterlife by doing, you know. And so in October 1844, he takes on his first wife, and by the end of it, he's taken on 10 wives. And, like, they move to Utah, and he lives this whole life. And Sarah Pratt eventually leaves him. When the last straw is when he marries his 10th wife, and he's 57 years old and she's 16. Wow. And Sarah is like, I am done. And so she leaves Utah and she becomes an apostate, and she, like, and that's the only time we have public records of her talking about what happened. And she, like, is like, Joseph Smith accused me of all this stuff and I didn't do it, and he did. And Brigham Young is, like, the most bloodthirsty man I've ever known, and Orson Pratt is a little prick. Just kidding, she doesn't say that. But yeah, she just becomes a very vocal anti-polygamous, anti-church advocate at that point, like, years later. Like, they're in their 50s at that point.
Right.
And so that's, like, and then Orson Pratt, Brigham Young uses Orson Pratt. He's the one who announces the revelation in 1852. Because polygamy, the revelation of polygamy had never been revealed, even though apparently Joseph Smith had it back then.
Is the one that revealed it?
Yeah, Brigham Young in this special conference had Orson Pratt reveal it. And he's like, I know we've always said that we don't practice this, but here's a revelation.
Which is also interesting, too. I feel like if him and Orson were always at conflict, it's like, you owe me this. You have to do this.
And I feel like Brigham Young used Orson Pratt as his, like, fall guy a lot. Because he released, like, a book about the seer. It was called The Seer, and it had a lot of justifications for polygamy. And when they started getting critiques about it, Brigham Young was like, that was all Orson Pratt's fault, you know? And so I feel like, and Brigham Young had some crazy theology, like the Adam God doctrine, which is where he said Adam, the first man on earth, was actually God, and, like, all these weird things. And Orson Pratt was, like, not afraid to be like, no. There's literally quotes of him being like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, and easily just proven by scriptures. That's, like, basically what I wanted to talk about was the Pratts. It's sad what happened to both of them. Like, Sarah, that was, like, crazy. Like, a crazy situation for a woman to be involved in, caught in the middle of two powerful men questioning her reputation, her husband, like, having a breakdown, and then eventually taking on polygamy, and she lived.
Yeah, just what a turn of events.
Yeah, kind of crazy. And so the next episode, I actually want to go, we're not going to move forward in time. I want to stay in Nauvoo and talk about, like, the actual sources, you know, like, which sources, like, we know the narrative of what people are saying, but what are the sources, what was actually happening, and what was Joseph Smith saying publicly and versus what he was doing privately, and Emma Smith and Brigham Young, all of them. So that's what we're going to get into next time.
Versus, like, what the church is picking.
Yeah, because I think you have to have the narrative in order to even understand it before going into the sources, you know? So I wanted to go over that, but then I think it's really important to dig into who's saying what, and, like, is there alternative narratives, and is it a conspiracy? Like, what makes a conspiracy versus what makes an official narrative? Is it authority or is it truth?